are Slidoing away. Yes, it's all here. Oh, okay. Morena koutou. Just a quick briefing about, we've got the Minister coming in a few minutes. There will be media in the room. What I'd warmly encourage you to do is put as many questions as you like onto Slido whenever you like. So if you know there's a question you'd like the Minister to be asked already, feel free to stick it in there, and then if you could all read the questions and vote them up. But at the end of the day, there will probably only be time for a small handful of questions, and which ones get asked will be in Murray's hands. But don't feel disempowered by that. Just get those questions up there anyway, and you never know your luck. But we will be looking to start promptly at 9. Thanks. What I'd really like is for you to, actually, would you be happy to chair the next session so I can just take a break? No, never. No, I don't know what I've done. Yeah, it might be. Yeah. Probably. Let's see what our angle is, but maybe just, yeah, absolutely. Yep. No, we're not having a road. There's no roving mic. Well, no, I'm just not allowing people. We won't recognise it. It would be Slido only, and then Murray can just choose the questions he wants. Yeah, she's right here. And then white orally t-shirt.
Good morning, everyone. Is this microphone going? Yep. Okay. Welcome to the second day of our ASMS conference. It's my great pleasure to introduce the Honourable Andrew Little, newly appointed Minister of Health and also Minister for Treaty of Waitangi Negotiations, Pike River Entry, GCSB and NZSIS. The Minister had to reschedule his talk from yesterday due to the opening of Parliament. We thought it might be slightly unreasonable to try and get the opening of the Parliament changed, so he's tending today. Thank you very much. Minister Little is ideally suited to talk to us today, given his long background in union work and Te Tiriti. I'm sure he'll probably know that our biggest issues for ASMS recent times have been our 24% workforce shortage, 50% burnout rate, and major concerns around wellbeing and equity, especially gender equity and also Maori and Pacifica equity. And our other very major concerns of huge unmet need in health and underinvestment in staffing and infrastructure over the last 10 years. So there are bigger expectations on the new mandated and unshackled Labour government. We look forward to hearing what you've got to say, Minister Little.
Kia ora koutou, i ngā mana, i ngā reo, i ngā karangaranga maha. Tēnā koutou, e te whare etu nei, tēnā koutou, e te toi mata hauora, tēnā koutou, tēnā te mihi, kia koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. Good morning, everybody, and thank you, Murray, for that introduction and for raising those expectations. I want to begin by saying, look, it's a genuine privilege actually to be in the role of Minister of Health, and I know it is a very challenging time, it's a very challenging sector. I haven't had a former Minister of Health yet, and their messages to me say just congratulations. It's usually congratulations and commiserations. That might just underscore the fact that there are some very serious challenges actually that as a country we need to meet. So, look, thank you for the welcome and for the opportunity to be here. I want to make some acknowledgements. In addition to you, Murray, I want to acknowledge your Association National Executive, your Executive Director, Sarah Dalton, who I'm coming to know. I think we've met a few times now, Sarah, and I look forward to continuing and establishing the relationship with Sarah, with your organisation, and so on as well. I want to acknowledge the Association's members. This has been, look, putting everything else aside, this year in particular has been a really tough year. It's been a tough year for every New Zealander, but it's been a tough year for the health sector as well. And the demands that the political leadership of the country have put on the sector to kind of suddenly pivot and turn around and be the critical frontline response to the pandemic has been a big ask, but our health sector, our health professionals have responded in an incredible way and in a way in which I know, every New Zealander will be most thankful for. It's not only required a shift in attention, it's created disruption, and even for those who might not have been on the front line of COVID-19, there is now the work of sort of the massive catch-up of work that wasn't done during those critical periods in March and April and subsequent months this year. So I do want to acknowledge you and your members and the incredible contribution that has been made. As Murray has acknowledged, some of you know, I have a union background, so I know the very important role that an organisation like yours plays. For medical professionals, for you and others in the sector, your role as advocates for patients, for those in the system, at an individual level is absolutely critical. But part of the advocacy for medical professionals is not just for individual patients, it's for the system as a whole. And the best voice for making sure we have the best system is a collective voice that organisations like the ASMS brings. And so I thank you, perhaps I thank you in advance for the advocacy that I know you will bring as we go through, I think, a period of change and rearrangement. So, in summary, let me just say thank you for what you and your members do individually and collectively. As I said, we are going to go through a period of change in the next few years, and I look forward to working with your organisation and others in the health sector as we face those challenges and as we make those changes. Conferences like this are an opportunity to exchange knowledge and experience and to support each other and to share in the camaraderie of the profession. So good on you for doing that. I understand there's about 160 of you here. A rough estimate, that looks about right, comparing it to Labor Party conferences I've spoken to. And I know, if only from the news broadcast in the last 24 hours, that you've had some very, very important issues to discuss, and I hope that we can engage meaningfully on those, not just today, but as the months wear on. I'm aware that you and, of course, your colleagues are our leading clinicians, and so, as I said before, I offer my thanks to what you have done. I've acknowledged the sort of year this has been, with the challenges of COVID-19, and again repeat my thanks for the effort that has been made, and I know that many New Zealanders will be thankful for it. I'm now apparently into day 25 of being Health Minister since Jacinda Ardern appointed me to that role. And one thing is very clear, I have a lot to come up to speed on and a lot to learn. I've spent the last few weeks doing a lot of reading, a lot of listening. There's still a lot more listening to go. I cannot believe the number of advocacy groups and interest groups that there are in the sector. That's by no stretch a criticism. It's an important thing. But it demonstrates to me the complexity of the system, the sophistication of it, and, if anything, to kind of explain the challenges that we have, because there is a lot to get right. Look, I don't think anybody would ever argue there's any such thing as a perfect health system, but we can aspire to have a bloody good one if we do the right things, and that's what I'd like to achieve. I can guarantee and assure you that my determination is to seek certainly a more sustainable, but actually a more equitable health and disability system here in Aotearoa. I understand that the ASMS supports the government's decision to separate out the leadership of our cross-agency COVID-19 response from the health portfolio. And there's no question my colleague Chris Hipkins is doing a terrific job in leading the COVID-19 response, but that occupies a large chunk of his working day and week. And actually, we kind of need to focus on the business as usual stuff as well, because that has been somewhat neglected in the last few months. So obviously I support the Prime Minister and her judgments, but it was the right thing to do in my view to separate that out and now give me an opportunity to put some focus on some of the other issues. We want to make sure that the reforms that have been somewhat anticipated in the Simpson report continue with the right focus and energy and aren't sort of second fiddle to the range of other issues that could happen in dealing with the COVID-19 response. Chris Hipkins and I will be working closely together over the coming period because so much of our pandemic response involves the whole system anyway. So we have to work closely together, and we do, and we are. But my main focus will be leading the reforms of the system, which I'm going to talk more about very shortly. I'm responsible for the overall function and operation of our health and disability system, community health, health workforce, aged care and mental health services. Of course, I'm very privileged to have the support of 3 associate ministers, Pēni Henare, who's responsible for a number of things, but principally Maori health, and he and I will be working closely together, because I think a measure of the reforms is the extent to which we close the access and services gap for Māori. Opito Williams-Seal, who, amongst other things, will take principal responsibility for Pacifica Health, and somebody who will possibly be familiar to you, Dr. Aisha Verrill, who I understand is a former, if not a current member of your organisation. There you are. And she's doing a terrific job already, also working with Chris Hipkins, working with me as well. And look, we are, as a government and as a party, just so privileged to have somebody of Dr. Verrill's capability to come in straight, not just into Parliament, but into Cabinet, playing the role that she's playing and providing fantastic leadership. She will bring, and I see it in all the meetings I've been through with her there already, the clinical expertise that she has to the very heart of government decision making. and she will bring a particular focus on public health. This will be invaluable, not only for our pandemic response, but actually for the general stuff that we do anyway. Very good also that Peni Henare will continue his role, his associate role on health, and his focus on Māori health, and as I said, Opito Williamsio in the Pacific area as well. This, or the hard work and leadership and advocacy and representation that each of those associate ministers will bring will be vital as we develop greater fairness in our health system. As I said before, achieving greater equity is a major focus of the government's response to the Health and Disability System Review's final report, Pūrongo Whakamutanga, or more commonly known as the Simpson Report, because of who chaired it, Heather Simpson. The government has the mandate to progress these reforms, and as I've also said, leading these changes is really my top priority. I know my predecessor, the Honourable David Clark, stood on this stage 2 years ago and urged you to contribute to the review, and I know you did, and you did with aplomb. And I want to thank you for the contribution of your wisdom and expertise to that. I'm sure many of you will have read the report. I'm reading it in very fine detail at the moment, and if you haven't read it, then I encourage you to do so. As I say, I picked that up. I had to pretty much as soon as I was appointed. And I'm pretty sure it's a document that's going to be by my side for time to come. That review found that we have a very good health and disability system, but it also confirmed that our health and disability services are under considerable stress and our system is fragmented and complex. Our COVID-19 response has exposed gaps in our system and underscored the fact that some New Zealanders aren't receiving the care that they need. I might also add that COVID-19 response demonstrated what is possible with a necessary spirit of collaboration to respond to a major public health crisis. Now, for example, I've recently learned of the impact that the lockdown and more rigorous PPE requirements have had on waiting lists for hospital-level dental care for children. I understand we also have a problem in making sure children receive their scheduled oral health checkup on time, and it's Māori and Pacific children who are bearing the brunt of the delays in this area. Given the importance of good oral health among our children as a foundation for good oral health over the entirety of their lives, this is a matter that I will be following very closely. I also acknowledge the frustrations raised by your members recently about growing demand in our hospital emergency departments. I've heard your concerns about how this may be linked to the difficulties some of our most vulnerable New Zealanders experience in accessing primary care. People don't go to the doctor, leave it, before they know it, they're turning up to the ED in a situation way worse than had they been able to get access to primary care much earlier. Health officials tell me that ED presentations have increased by 10% over the last 5 years, and this has been further exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic. I know the Ministry of Health is working with DHBs to improve acute patient flow and other processes, which we all hope will help in taking pressure off EDs. DHBs are also working with primary care providers on initiatives which should promote better access to primary care. Improved access to primary care remains a priority for the government. We acted quickly on this in our first term by extending cheaper doctors' visits to community services cardholders. The Simpson Report has set a path towards a more sustainable and equitable health and disability system. That includes greater emphasis on primary care, one in which situations like those I've just mentioned are less likely to develop. We know the system is failing Māori, and as a result, significant health and wellbeing inequities have been created. As Murray acknowledged, as Minister for Treaty Waitangi negotiations for the last 3 years, and a role that I'm very happy to have retained, I'm well aware that decades of health policy have failed to ensure access to healthcare in isolated and marginal communities, which has seen many Māori suffering worse health outcomes. It's vital that we turn this inequity around, and I'm determined that we will. The Waitangi Tribunal released its report, Hauora, on report on stage 1 of the Health Services and Outcomes Kaupapa Inquiry, the Hauora report, in July last year. That report and Pūrongo Whakamutanga highlight that we need to do more to move to a Treaty of Waitangi compliant and equity-focused system. The government is already moving in this direction. Over the past 3 years, we've begun and progressed a series of initiatives to support improved outcomes for Māori and Pacific peoples. For example, last year's wellbeing budget included additional investment in our Māori workforce development package to incentivise and support hundreds more Māori students into health professions. We invested in the Pacific Provider Workforce Development Fund to help develop a strong and sustainable Pacific health workforce and leadership that can contribute to reducing Pacific health inequities. Earlier this year, Minister Henare launched Whakamawa Maori Health Action Plan 2020 to 2025, which sets the pathway towards achieving pai ora healthy futures for all Māori. This is the first Māori Health Action Plan in almost 10 years. It's well aligned with the Simpson Report, crucially because the Simpson Report recommends we establish an independent Māori health authority. This authority, once established, should have the licence to be a game changer for Māori health services and outcomes. It needs to. Another major recommendation in the Simpson Report is to combine some DHBs, resulting in 8 to 12, fewer DHBs, roughly 8 to 12. But the objective of that recommendation is to have strong organisations responsible for delivering services in the areas. One of the things that I'm becoming acutely aware of as I sort of get into understanding the way the sector operates, and particularly the way the ministry operates, and the frontline health providers, including DHBs, is just the not quite disconnected, but certainly fragmented nature of decision-making across the system. And we have to reorient that so that we see all the participants in the system as working for a nationwide system, a system as a whole. In a country our size, to do otherwise, runs a very real risk, which may well be happening now, of duplicated effort, of wasted effort, and therefore of wasted resources. We still have more work to do to determine the overall future structure of the health and disability system, but the most important thing is to ensure services deliver what New Zealanders need and deserve. Cabinet has already signed off on the general direction of the Simpson Report. The Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, is leading a group of ministers to drive these changes. That group includes, obviously, myself, also Minister Henare, and, of course, a crucial person in all these things, the Minister of Finance, Grant Robertson. We've set up a transitional unit to carry out detailed policy and design work. That's led by former Director General of Health, Stephen McKernan, and administered by the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet. So some work is well underway. There'll be some, I wouldn't describe them as interim decisions, but some early decisions by the end of this year, but the critical decisions will be made in the early part of next year. I'm anticipating a draft future system operating model will be completed shortly, and then we will make final decisions, as I said, on that early in the new year. The Simpson Report suggested a 5-year timeline to implement the changes it recommends. I think that is too long to make changes to a system that is crying out for change now. In my view, we should take 18 months to 2 years to make the foundational changes that we need to make, some of those structural changes, so that the work of establishing processes and practices and culture can then begin. I acknowledge there is a lot of work to do, and I look forward to sharing progress with you in the near future, not just sharing in news of the progress, but engaging in what that progress looks like. In terms of our wider work program, improving our country's approach to mental health and addiction also remains an important government priority. We're well underway in implementing the recommendations of He Ara Oranga, the report of the Government Inquiry into Mental Health and Addiction, and I want to continue to press forward with those changes. As you'll remember, last year's wellbeing budget invested $1.9 billion in mental health and addiction initiatives over 5 years. This significant and sustained investment is across a range of portfolios. It's not just health, it's also in education and corrections and justice and in housing, because we know all these other areas are also determinants of health, including in mental health and wellbeing. I intend taking a close interest in the rollout of services and additional support to ensure Cabinet's expectations are being met and this work is being kept on track. Where possible, I look for opportunities to accelerate progress. One of the key challenges we face in this area of work is common across our health services, as you've identified in your report, building the workforce pipeline, stopping the drain. And I want to turn to some of those workforce issues now. I can assure you that the theme of the report, your report and your conference, resonates strongly with me. I'm aware that the health and disability system faces various workforce and cost pressures. The Simpson report includes a suite of recommendations to ensure our workforce is planned and managed more effectively to meet these challenges, something that I understand the ASMS is calling for. I'm eager to progress solutions to these challenges. Additionally, on workforce, I'm also aware that some progress has been made to address gender pay issues, which the ASMS has raised following research that showed female specialists were paid 12.5% less than male counterparts. DHBs have acknowledged that a pay gap exists and they're working with you to understand the reasons behind it and how it can be closed. I might add, this has been an issue across the public sector as a whole, but in this day and age, there is no defence of it, there is no explanation for it, and we have to get on and deal with it. In September, a gender pay working group was established between the DHBs and ASMS. The gender pay gap is not limited to pay alone. It also requires us to remove barriers from allowing full participation in the workforce for women and to address the challenges they may face compared to their male peers. Finally, I want to thank ASMS for writing your Health Matters paper, and I have to say it aligns well with the government's focus on wellbeing. As your paper correctly points out, we must tackle the broader socio-economic and cultural determinants of health if we are to achieve equity of health outcomes and in order to truly lift wellbeing. The government has the mandate to continue to tackle these issues. In our first wellbeing budget last year, we identified priorities where we could make the greatest long-term difference to improving New Zealanders' living standards and wellbeing. This year's wellbeing budget focused on rebuilding together. It included a $50 billion COVID-19 response and recovery fund to help support New Zealanders and the economy through the effects of COVID-19 and the global recession. As the Prime Minister said when unveiling our new Cabinet at the start of this month, the government's priorities for the next 3 years are to drive our economic recovery from COVID-19 and to continue our health response to keep New Zealanders safe from the virus. This year's Vote Health funding reflects the most significant pressures on the health and disability sector, our COVID-19 pandemic response, increased demand from population growth and ageing, and increased costs due to wage and price inflation. It includes the biggest ever increase in funding for DHBs, an extra $3.9 billion over 4 years, as well as additional funding to deliver about 153,000 more surgeries and procedures, radiology scans and specialist appointments to help clear the COVID-19 backlog. We've committed record levels of investment into our health and disability system in our first 3 budgets. I acknowledge that just as the unfortunate effects of underfunding emerged over many years, in many cases it will take time for our increased level of funding to be felt in your day-to-day work. Implementing the reforms recommended in the Simpson report will help to ensure the system's financial sustainability into the future. So let me close by saying that, again, thank you to your incredible contribution towards keeping New Zealanders safe and healthy, and particularly during this pandemic. I look forward to hearing about the outcomes from this conference and to continue to work with you over the coming 3 years as we seek to make change for the betterment of everybody. Thank you once again for inviting me here today.
Thanks very much, Minister Little, for that very encouraging initial talk to ASMS. It's very encouraging that you have seen the publications and the research that we do and you're familiar with those. It's very helpful. And we look forward to maybe some frequent collaboration in some way with yourself at times the next 3 years. We've been using Slido, which is a gadget which gives questions from the audience. They're coming up to Sarah here. We have about 5 minutes. Are you happy to take 5 minutes questions?
Make it 10, 15 if you like.
Okay.
I'll see how the questions go first.
Yeah.
Okay, do you want me to read them? Or do you
Yeah, maybe if you can probably read them easier than me.
Okay. Minister, will you commit to a Royal Commission or parliamentary inquiry into systemic industrial bullying of healthcare workers by managers across all our DHBs? It's a nice easy one for you to start with.
Yeah, look, I totally hear the point about bullying in the workplace, and I know, strange as it may be for a caring profession or caring professions, that it happens and it is serious, and there has to be an effective response to it. Whether or not a Royal Commission of Inquiry is a response to it, I'm not sure. We've done a number of Royal Commissions of Inquiry, and in the last 3 years, they are, the biggest of which is the one into historic sexual abuse of those in state and faith-based care, and that's a 5-year inquiry. We have a range of laws to deal with workplace bullying and harassment. If the laws aren't up to scratch, it's we can deal with that. But in the end, it's going to be management practice, management conduct, and management behaviour, and management leadership that is going to determine, the behaviours, the tolerated behaviours in workplaces. So, while I'm happy to commit to this being an area of work that we put some focus on, I'm not sure I would sign up at this point to conducting a Royal Commission of Inquiry into it.
What are your plans to address chronic staff shortages across the health workforce? Every shift I work, thank you Tanya, there are unfilled staff roles.
And this is an area that the Simpson report spent some time on. We know in the last 3 years there's been a net increase of medical professionals to the DHBs alone, much less the front line, and thinking about new ways of delivering forms of healthcare as well. We know that for a country like New Zealand, with our 2 medical schools, with the capacity that they've got, we rely in part on them. We rely on folks coming from overseas to staff our health system. And the pandemic response kind of really cuts through a lot of that. So I acknowledge that there is much more to do. I think the Simpson report talks about the need for much better workforce planning. And I think the ASMS report talks about the need for better data so we can actually do that planning. I have indicated to Ministry of Health officials this has got to be a priority area in this day and age for a sector this important and this large in a country like ours. The idea that we don't have a plan or a strategy for workforce renewal and development just seems criminal to me. So that is a priority piece of work that I want us to get onto straight away.
Would you fund DHBs appropriately instead of asking them to, quote, live within their means?
Yeah, well, that's the $64 million question, or $64 billion question, depending on how you look at it. Look, there's always going to be a debate about what is a proper level of funding. I've raised the question in most of the early briefings I've had with the ministry, with the transition unit, with anybody else who cares to listen. In a country of 5 million and anticipating 6 million in less than 20 years and 7 million and probably within 30 years, with our kind of level of collective wealth and with the nature of our population and its profile, what is an appropriate level of health spend? We can do the comparators with overseas, and we do that. We compare ourselves with OECD countries, and we are sort of mid-range there. But what is the right level of health spending? Ultimately, that is a political question, and that is a subject of political debate between elections and during elections. But there is a finite funding to go to any sector, but including to health. I think what's important, and one of the gaps, and I think it's identified in the Simpson report, is the way we fund health and the certainty that it gives those responsible for making financial decisions as well as clinical decisions about certainty for the future. And I think we can do a lot better in that regard. But how we negotiate and mediate what the appropriate level of resourcing is, that's a subject of ongoing political debate. And not just how much we do for the sector as a whole, it's where it goes. Do we spend more on pharmaceuticals? Do we spend more, put more into primary care and access to primary care? What do we put into the secondary and tertiary care levels? Those are judgments that are being made all the time. All I can do is say, keep up your voice, keep contributing to the debate. Your voice is essential, but it's not the only voice and it's not the only consideration that gets taken into account.
Got time for one more?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. ACC has almost $50 billion in investment reserves. At conference yesterday, it was suggested that ACC should allocate more funding each year to provide better emergency and trauma care in our hospitals. Do you agree?
There's two ways of answering this. One is to say that I'm not the Minister for ACC, so it's not my responsibility. The other is to completely throw caution to the wind and say, in spite of the fact that I'm not Minister for ACC, about which I have some firm views, I think we have to be careful because the model we have for ACC at the moment is that private insurance model, which is they have to be able to fund today all their the lifetime liabilities that they carry on their books at the moment, hence their massive balance sheet. It's on the principle that if ACC was abolished tomorrow, all those who are in the system and are expecting ACC to continue funding their treatment, their lifelong treatment and earnings-related compensation where that applies, they would continue to get that. There is a political debate about whether that's the right model for ACC, but I'll leave you to contribute to that in the appropriate time. What ACC should do with its funding is, again, that is an important debate for ACC and policymakers to have. I think there's a lot more ACC could be investing in that would be more preventative than just responding to those who are harmed and injured by accidents. The reality is, I think, for this government, the next big challenge will be looking at ACC's remit and how much longer do we continue to say, somebody suffering a stroke or a cardiac event is not, should not be covered by ACC. Do we actually go back to the original 1967 Woodhouse report and what was contemplated there about life events that take you by surprise and that sort of being covered or not? So, and I would welcome the contribution by health professionals into that aspect of the debate.
Thanks again, Minister. We appreciate that the time you've given us today out of your very busy schedule, which I imagine is incredibly busy at the moment, getting into things.
I'm down to Canterbury today,
Yeah.
so
Yeah. Excellent. Good luck.
look forward to a warm welcome. Yeah.
Thanks very much.
Cheers. Cheers.
Okay, I'm going to ask Julian Fuller to come up to chair our next session. Thanks, Julian.
Hi. We're going to continue the very good sustainability theme that we've heard quite a lot of this conference. And I've got Ruth Large. Have we got Darren?
There he is.
Yeah. We've got a tandem act with Ruth Large, who comes from Waikato Hospital, and is dual trained, and Darren Douglas, who comes out of the ministry, and they're going to tell us their thoughts on sustainability and digital healthcare.
Thanks, Julie. I thought this was very cunning to put a large after a little, but we'll do our best. We'll do our best to follow up on that. Stealing some of his words. Look, first of all, I'd like to say thank you very much for having us. Like every good generalist who has a very has a general knowledge, I decided to call a friend to deliver this presentation. So Darren and I are going to tag team a little bit of this. We're going to try and tell a bit of a story. So Renee, you can vet us. Thank you very much. Just a little bit about where we are at the moment and where we could be in the future. With the rider from me particularly that I'm not a technologist. My particular interest is in telehealth, but in digital tools that improve accessibility to healthcare. So I'll rattle through a few slides, Darren will rattle through a few slides, and hopefully you've got a whole lot of stuff on Slido, so we're very slide dominated today. And we'll have enough room for some conversation at the end, yeah? So the themes that we're going to talk about are digital health and measures of maturity, current issues in digital health, national strategy, a bit about COVID and how that's changed. And I like the Minister's point that, you know, COVID-19 certainly looked at what is possible with a necessary spirit of cooperation, were his words. Some thoughts on telehealth and the national developments going forward and the National Health Informatics Platform. So this is the Ministry's description of digital health. It's a bit of an old term now, I think. Darren, when does this come from? It is from the 20s.
Yeah, it'll be 2015 probably.
Yeah, 2015, yeah, so it's about 5 years old. But I think it's still true that digital health is the use of digital technologies and accessible data and the associated cultural change it induces to help New Zealanders manage their health and well-being and transform the nature of healthcare delivery. One of the reasons I think this statement is really important is because it's got two great things in there, and that's about cultural change and transforming the nature of healthcare delivery. And those are obviously really, words chosen with care that we should be mindful of, because that is the direction. And again, like every good generalist, I like a team around me, and perhaps not like every good generalist, all of I learned from medicine probably came from the television, and I must have missed the storytelling. But if we think about sci-fi and what it's given to us in terms of digital health, there's an awful lot of stuff that we can learn. And I reflect that many of us sit like our commanders in this huge pool of flashing lights and overwhelming amount of data. And this is what our digital tech has given us. And it's given us the inability to actually be able to direct our attention quite often. So we do get attentional deficits. We've also got augmentation of our senses. So, things like Google Glass are coming out. So there's lots of different tools out there that we have the opportunity to use. And of course, we've got inbuilt telehealth robots, just like the aptly named data. And my personal favourite, the tricorder. And nobody was more excited, except for maybe Willem van der Merwe, to receive a little butterfly ultrasound device, which I now carry in my pocket, and I liken to my tricorder. So, if you think about the digital technology we now carry in our hands, that digital technology is more powerful than the computers that I used at high school, And a good majority of us here, looking around the room, grew up in a very different age to what our junior staff are growing up in. This technology has just changed so rapidly. And yeah, look, this is a really reasonable article. I don't know how many have read this article from Ato Gawande. Yeah, if you haven't, do read it. It is an American, focused paper, but it's a really good one. It talks a lot about screens coming in front of our patients, and admittedly, in America, their computer systems are more designed for billing. So they've seen, and it's a really, really good paper of what to avoid when you're going to do your digital health systems. And we all know that we've grown up in this fractured digital environment. We could blame cheese, we could blame all sorts of things. We went through a lot of change when our digital environment was growing. So we haven't got a national platform yet. There's no doubt that our digital tools have resulted in physician burnout. There's a significant amount of papers published on this, and it's got to do with this uncoded communication that we've developed with our patients, but also information overload. We've got data and more data and more data. We haven't got automated tasks yet. We've got alert fatigue, but also we've got poor digital literacy, and some of that we need to take on board for ourselves. You know, that's actually our baggage too. You know, how we spend our medical education time, I think, is relevant here. And I've got a quote there from Eric Topol, who again wrote the NHS Topol report, preparing the healthcare workforce to deliver the digital future. Again, I don't know how many people have read it. I'm probably a bit geeky. I might be, there's a few hands in the room, thank you. This is a really awesome report. And, you know, I think New Zealand was still in the early adopter phase of digital medicine. And, you know, scepticism is a good thing, because we could easily go down that realm, move from, you know, big pharma through to big digital, you know, and invest unwisely. We're all living in our own little silos and want our own little bits of tech. So we need to be cautious of that as well. There's definitely proven value for patients. There's proven value for patients in telehealth, in electronic medicines, electronic vital signs, and probably in an electronic health record, although the information there's a little bit mixed. But nowhere in New Zealand is fully digital. And being half pie is really probably the biggest problem that we have. And we heard from our RMO colleagues yesterday about how, you know, we were transcribing paper into computers, and, you know, I know a number of colleagues who will transcribe multiple times their information. So have a look at that report. I think one of the things also, you know, we've heard a lot about leadership over the last couple of days, and there are very few DHBs who've got roles such as mine, Clinical Director of Information Services. It's got absolutely no teeth, I promise you. I can't do anything. Sorry, Waikato colleagues. But it's a good start, you know, and we are seeing more of these roles develop, and unless we all take a bit of responsibility for that, then we'll get what we're given. Again, I'm sorry, this is an old slide. It is 5 years old. Well, it's not older than that, is it? Is it 5 years old? Might be a bit older.
6 or 7.
6 or 7, sorry. But the illustration, I think, is important. We have measures of digital maturity, and we are looking at much better ones, and I'm sure many of you have also looked at the National Asset Review and seen how poorly our technology platforms are based. They're really old. But the interesting thing, more for me, is this gap. So, you know, once you start on this old stage, you sort of see, well, up you get to stage 7, that's a complete electronic medical record, including things like decision support. But this gap here, you know, Southern, Canterbury, Waitemata, I mean, it's awesome that these guys are leading the way, but actually it's not okay for the rest of us to be down here. And that's this gap, I think, we really need to be very mindful of. And I think that gap is probably still similar, even though our maturity levels measures have altered. So I'm going to hand over to Darren to talk a bit about the Digital Health Strategic Framework.
Thanks, Ruth, and kia ora tātou, everyone. So just one comment on the digital maturity assessments. We've been starting to refresh those with a number of DHBs, and the one thing that I personally didn't like about the 2013-14 iteration was that it gave every DHB a score. So your eyes were drawn to whether you were a level 3 or a level 4 or a level 5. The interesting thing about those maturity assessments is that they're assessed at 7 levels. The ones that we've just done, every DHB we've assessed has got capabilities at level 7, but they also have gaps at level 1. So we're far more drawn to the maturity assessments informing where we've got gaps and where we can improve than whether you're a 2, 3, 4 or 5. The comment that I'd make around our thinking of how do you deliver digital health, and particularly referencing that cultural change, is that the digital health environment we work in is an ecosystem, it's not an organisation. And the rationale behind how you engineer change in an ecosystem is that you don't try to impose structure artificially on that ecosystem, because it's constantly changing and evolving. The technology is constantly moving, organisations are changing, business, clinical need, consumer expectations are changing. So instead of imposing structure, if I can get this to work, we have some aspirational objectives and goals, and these are pretty much motherhood and apple pie, looking at what people are expecting, looking at how do we inform clinical decision making, how do we improve health outcomes and equity. And then as a ministry, we focus on these key enablers. So rather than trying to dictate what particular application you should use or what particular type of technology, we are really focused on interoperability, so that there is choice about technology, but there's confidence that health information is accessible regardless of the particular vendor product you're using. We need data standards for that information to come together. We need security, privacy and trust at all times, particularly as we start to talk about empowered consumers. Social license in this space is hard to gain, really easy to lose. We also need some foundation services, and digital identity is one of those. So if we don't absolutely know who an individual is, we can't provide them with information confidently that's appropriate to their role and to the permissions that they've been given. And then it's not all about the tech. We also think about some of the barriers we know within the sector today. So procuring technology is not particularly digital. It's a very long, drawn-out process and fails to recognise that technology is constantly iterating and changing. So our procurement practices don't really fit a digital world. Our business case approval processes and funding processes similarly don't really fit a fast-moving digital world. And then from an innovation point of view, we have lots of good ideas and lots of little innovations, but we don't necessarily scale them or replicate them very well for whole of system value. And we don't even have the basic visibility of who is doing what. So that means that there's real opportunities being missed. And we think as a ministry, these are the things that we really need to focus on. And just a word around data, we know we've got lots of data, so no one's arguing that we don't have any data. We've got lots of it, but it's really hard to get to. So it's locked up within organisations, within particular systems, and there's variation in how it's collected. So some is only on paper, a lot is digital, but when it's digital, it's based on different standards. And we really don't have a lot of clarity on how do we apply data governance across information when information is able to flow across that entire ecosystem. Our governance structures tend to be anchored around an organisation, a DHB, a hospital, a GP practice. And we certainly don't get a lot of insights out of the data we've got, either from a health system point of view, supporting planning policy, from a clinical point of view, informing decision making, or from a consumer point of view, informing well-being and empowering people. So we use the analogy of where we want to get to, and just bear with me a second on this one. So we talk about a GPS experience. So if you get a hire car in a city you haven't been to before, you hop in that hire car or you use the map apps on your phone and you can enter where you want to go and it'll suggest the right way to get there. It'll suggest some alternative routes. It'll constantly adjust that based on traffic conditions along your way. It will tell you the speed limit, where you can stop if you want a coffee. You can read reviews of the cafes in that area from other people that have been there, and it'll constantly adjust the time to arrive. The reason that we like that analogy as we apply it to health is that none of the data that drives that experience was created for the purpose of that experience. All of that data exists for a whole bunch of other reasons. A GPS app brings it all together in a really seamless and intuitive way. So I don't know about you, but I've never hopped in a hire car with a GPS unit and had to sit there and have a 30-minute training course before I could use it. It's pretty intuitive. I can also personalise it. So if I want my Maps app to, have Billy Connolly telling me the directions, then I can do that if I want. If I want it in a different language, I can do that as well. So this idea that data that exists is easily brought together in a way that's personalised and appropriate underlies how we start to think about health. What if we could do that in health? What if we could provide people with alerts on their wearables? What if we could give them access to their full health record or the parts of their health record that are appropriate for the care that they're receiving? What if we could use telehealth interventions? What if we could use that data from a register's point of view to understand outcomes for a cohort and feed that into clinical decision making and planning? And what if we stopped thinking episodically and we had a seamless end-to-end interaction with the health system driven by the consumer and empowered by that data? And then if the consumer had the ability to also enter and contribute data, then that would also change the experience. And the thing about the digital experience is that our thinking is that we don't want to buy a single system that does all of that, because if we do, it will be like the Acknowledgements article. I can guarantee that you really won't like that system too much. There was a term that's been phrased in the States around the big investment around EMRs. They refer to them as digital cement. So they were purchased for at a point in time for a purpose. Things have moved on. They are very hard to change. So this agile, iterative, evolutionary approach is where we want to get to. I'll hand back to Ruth.
So when we start talking about emerging technologies in the future, I think we've probably all had experience now with telehealth. And this slide does seem a little bit frivolous. When I said we would need to move towards doing our clinical work in different ways from usual, I was talking about telehealth, and here comes somebody rocking up in their unicycle and supportive equipment. But I think it's a good example of actually being able to understand where we're going together, because if we don't enunciate that, then it becomes difficult to move together. So just as background, I'm the chair of the New Zealand Telehealth Leadership Group. We're coming up to our 13th year, and no, we did not release COVID. It's a 30-member group, and we span the country. We span clinical groups, we span technology groups, and we've got program managers, business managers, we've got a CFO rep, and allied health professionals. It's a whole gamut of folk. And the sole purpose of that group was to promote and encourage the use of best practice telehealth. We've got a resource centre that hopefully some of you have already consulted, and a number of webinars that I know some of you have already watched. I particularly point you towards the one on equity in healthcare, and there's also a good one, I think, on which we did with Health Literacy New Zealand about how to conduct a good telehealth consultation. So you'll find us on that website there. So that was our background, and I don't think we've ever been so busy in the last 12 months. We started with a little bit of a hiss and roar anyway in the beginning of the year, and things just got busier from there. So how do we define telehealth? Telehealth is defined as the use of information communication technology to deliver healthcare where the patient and the provider, or the participant and the provider, are in separate locations. So that's actually text, that's telephone, that's video, email. There's a variety of ways we do that. And radiological images, the way we interpret those, send them, beam those all around the world, that's called teleradiology. And the council makes the note that most doctors are already using some form of information and communication technology in their practice, and it's becoming an integral part of medicine. There's also a statement about the benefits of telehealth, particularly focusing on patients in isolated locations receiving necessary care, but also convenience of care. And that's kind of an older model now of benefits. It doesn't talk a lot about the benefits to not physically seeing a patient, because there are some, such as in the COVID period, where you don't actually want to bring a patient into an outpatient clinic or a busy waiting room where they could be exposed to infectious disease. And also benefits to clinicians in terms of, I know that some clinicians talk about being able to extend their practice into their later years in more of an advisory role for telehealth, and reducing travel. We heard yesterday about our rate of carbon emissions. That this is Northland DHB's carbon emission profile, and we heard about how our travel impacts the environment. But I'd also like you to consider patient travel and the travel that we do to provide care for patients. So you can see here that this whole wedge here is travel, staff commute, and here's patient private travel. And, when we think about this as well, that slide didn't turn out so well, did it? But let's spare a thought for our Maori patients, who travel further. They're less likely to be able to make an appointment anyway, and their fuel costs are larger, and their carbon emissions are also greater. So, when we start thinking about equity, that's true for how we deliver our healthcare services digitally also. Now, up to 3 years ago, we were delivering traditional video conferencing. This is a picture of one of our rehabilitation clinicians in Thames, who comes by video. He has a video ward round once a week, and a number of us have got resus rooms which have videos installed. So we've seen pockets of excellence in regional implementation, all being champion-led, less than 2% of total consultations. Over the last 18 months to 2 years, we've seen software-based tools grow. The technology's caught up with how we want to deliver healthcare, and there's a variety of those tools, but really still only less than 5%. And then came COVID, you know, and if we thought we were already living in a fragmented and complex world, nothing like COVID to really challenge us, but also to try and pull things together. And, you know, just over one weekend, I think we had a very busy weekend, didn't we, Darren? Yeah, just as the GP said, okay, 75% of your consultations are going to go by telehealth. You're going to do them by telephone or video. And it was a huge ask for our GP community. Just over the weekend, they were trying to, you know, grab webcams and all sorts of, you know, it was bedlam, and I imagine that some of you are either GPs or have partners who are GPs, or you know, have seen your GP colleagues go through this. So there was this rapid adoption of telehealth, but almost all of it was by phone. There was, for those people who already had video established, they used Zoom, WebEx or Teams, and they were able to transition, but there were lots of challenges, not enough bandwidth, not enough phone lines. Patients were really ill-prepared, you know, and clinicians were really ill-prepared. So we spent a bit of time trying to make up packs for patients so that they would understand, you know, what telehealth was. You know, how do you make a consent for telehealth in these sort of circumstances? Oh. This is a little segue into the other uses of telehealth, something else we did in the... You know, when we talk about wellness, that for me was my lifeline. So a lot of emergency departments through Australasia, we all recorded our own little bits of video, and then somebody put them all together. And it did feel as if we were all together at that point. So there are a whole lot of ways that we can use technology in our favour, and I imagine there's lots of you who've gone through similar sort of things with your online communities, if you like. And likewise, this is a photo of my parents, both with chronic illness. You know, my dad's got metastatic melanoma. Some of you may remember him. He's either taught you or maybe a fellow psychiatrist. You know, and his oncologist turned rapidly to telephone, and it frustrated the heck out of him. You know, because he's like, I want to see the whites of his eyes, you know. You know, we often do think, you know, we pigeonhole our patients into who we think will tolerate a consultation by video. You know, we assume, you know, if you're Maori, if you're old, you know, you may not want to have a telehealth consultation. You have to ask patients really what they prefer. But this also demonstrates, you know, pre-lockdown, 7 DHBs were providing 280, we think video, we don't count these well, consultations a week. During lockdown, 12 DHBs, 2,000 consultations. Now we're down to 870. But 16 DHBs, probably the other 4 are doing them, but we just don't have numbers. So that's a report that's come out from Health Informatics New Zealand, well worth reading. And also over this time, we've seen this proliferation of direct-to-patient telehealth apps. So this is a recent article from New Zealand Doctor magazine. What's that, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 direct-to-patient telehealth apps, all aimed from general practice. It's really easy to build these. You can build these really, really easily. If you want to build telehealth applications for people with easy access, easy peasy. If you want to build telehealth services to reach those patients who really need it, it's really hard and it's challenging. And that's the bit we need to get to. So we need to look at how they use these technologies and actually build them for the patients who need them. Sorry, what should I say? I think we'll just talk about the COVID-19 experience for the ministry now and end up.
So Ruth really talked about the impact of COVID-19 on uptake of telehealth and e-prescribing as an example. We went from about 37% of GPs electronically prescribing through the national broker in February. We're currently around 90% now, and it went from 37 to about 85 in the space of 4 weeks. So huge uptake. The thing that we learnt from COVID was that it's really important to understand how you decide what technology to use. So just because the technology is there, it doesn't mean that you should necessarily spend time and investment on it. And these were principles that were endorsed by Cabinet to support our decision making. So when we looked at technology, we needed to make sure that everything we focused on had an impact on the public health response. We needed to make sure that privacy was front and centre in terms of the design of those technologies, and we needed to balance the public health response with the economic response in terms of how did this really enable freedom of movement. And then lastly, we needed solutions that were feasible, that could be delivered and scaled really quickly. We were flooded with offers of technology solutions from all over the place, from all over the world. Really hard to decide where you put your energies in that context. So Ruth's talked about telehealth acceleration. Cloud is a real leveller here. The reason we could respond as quickly as we did was because we had cloud services, we had platforms we could leverage and use really, really quickly. 5 years ago, if COVID had hit, we would have been in real trouble. So those consumer grade applications, telehealth services, the availability of cloud enabled us to respond really quickly. We also got used to working remotely, so the video that Ruth showed there, I mean, you know, you don't need training in how to use Zoom. Everyone hopped on it and was using it. We from the ministry went from pretty much everyone being based in the office overnight to everyone working from home, and the tech worked. I mean, it had its glitches, of course, but by and large it worked, and people found it really effective. We rapidly created some new digital channels. So the COVID Tracer app that I'm the product owner for is now about 2.38 registered users. The ministry's never delivered a direct-to-consumer service before. We had to learn really quickly how you did that, and we made mistakes and we got some stuff right. But back to that digital health definition and the reality, we could iterate. We could iterate quickly. We could put product out there, we could get feedback, we could refine and move forward. And you can do that with all of these tools. Our public health platform, the contact tracing platform, was stood up in about 3 weeks from scratch, from zero. That's pretty quick. In fact, a day after we went into level 4 lockdown, the national contact tracing platform was live. So pretty quick. And what it did for us is it reinforced the importance of those strategic enablers around interoperability, security, privacy, trust, and just some basic foundations. And it gave us a confidence that you can actually try this and you can do it, but you need to understand the problems you're trying to solve. So I'm not clinical, and I wouldn't assume to know what clinicians need, but I have been in health IT for 30 years, so I sort of know that you probably want to start by asking people. You need to understand what those problems are. And sorry, very busy slide, but we created a lot of these capabilities, and we're looking to leverage these going forward rather than simply have them as something that was created for COVID and then thrown away. So the COVID Tracer app, we created the Athena app, which was for the health workforce as a way of getting COVID updates pushed to people through an app on the phone. We had a privacy by design approach, so we worked really closely with Office of the Privacy Commissioner along the way. We did a lot around data. I don't think I've ever seen so many dashboards in the sector as I did in about 4 or 5 weeks when we went to lockdown. Every DHB, every practice and the ministry were creating data dashboards. It was pretty difficult because in the background you were sort of wiring stuff together, but it got easier as we used some of those technologies. We had to support these things. So when you deliver services over the internet, which is the only network that is going to allow you to reach the maximum number of people you need to reach, you better be rock solid around your security. And it's a very different model to delivering services on a hospital network or a private network. So we had to learn really fast and leverage commercial capability there. We also had to learn how to support these things. So when you've got 2.3 million people using an app that might need some support, you better understand how you're going to scale that. You also better get it right, otherwise your operational support load is going to drown. And lots of work in the sector, just small things, sponsored data, removing the cost of data charges for key websites, looking at how we can fund access to internet, to data, to systems for people who maybe currently don't have them. And some key enablers, digital health identity. We are currently working on leveraging off of COVID, creating a digital health identity for every New Zealander and for every person in the Health Practitioner Index. So that will be an account-based identity that is linked to an NHI or to the HPI that is available to the sector to be able to leverage. How does the sector leverage that? Or effectively what they are able to do is trust that that is a verified identity that can be used within within your organisations to provide access to clinical data or to business processes. So we're working on that at the moment. Interoperability, how do we make data flow? I'll talk about that in a second. And immunisations, major investment happening at the moment around the national immunisation system. Obviously focused initially on COVID vaccine, but ultimately replacing the current national immunisation register, which is a little long in the tooth. So the National Health Information Platform is actually takes a bit of explaining because it sounds like a thing, right? It sounds like we're going to go to the market and buy one of these, and that's the last thing we would want to do. It's really a concept, and it's really talking about that GPS experience. So we've got lots of data. It's in national systems, it's in clinical systems, it's in consumer systems. Ruth's talked about the surge in the number of direct-to-consumer services that are out there. There's social data that doesn't even sit within the health domain. NHIP is about bringing that data together and making it accessible through application programming interfaces, so standard components that can be used by products, services and tools to deliver access to that data to consumers and their whānau, to providers, clinicians, to policymakers and planners, and also to industry. So also to the people that develop smart software, giving them access to data in an appropriate way to deliver great product, and ultimately to provide choice so that organisations and people can choose what service works for them, just like the GPS example, but be confident that it's joining the right data, it's getting trusted data. So we've got objectives around innovation, we've got objectives around enabling whānau consumers and their carers to better manage their own care, health and wellbeing. We really want to target equity, so we need to tackle digital inclusion and that digital divide. There's no point standing up great digital services if there are communities that can't get the internet, so we need to tackle that as well. We also need to understand what clinicians need to enable better care and decision making and provide flexibility around workforce. So to that sustainability theme, we think this is really key as an enabler to allow the sector to flex and adapt and evolve to address those sustainability challenges. I won't go through these. We're working, again, back to understanding the problem first. We have crafted 6 problem statements that we think we should focus on to start with, and we're working through some co-design processes on these at the moment. So we think people should be able to update their own NHI details. Seems pretty obvious to me, but today they can't. We also think that all health professionals should be able to access health information for people that are in their care. If you are in a DHB, GP practice, a large NGO, you can pretty much do this already, but if you're a small NGO, quite often you have access to nothing. So we think that needs to be addressed. Medicines is really key, chronic conditions is really key, and we want to make sure that health information is accessible to all New Zealanders. So today the main conduit for that are patient portals through GPs. They tend to be tethered to a GP practice management system, so if you're lucky enough to have a GP whose practice offers one of these portals, then you have access to some data. If you don't belong to one of those practices, quite often you have no access at all. So we think all New Zealanders at no cost should have access to that data. And we also think there's a real challenge around entitlements that we might be able to solve. So today, understanding what people's eligibility and entitlements are for services is pretty difficult because they come from multiple places and the consumer doesn't know. Quite often the health provider doesn't know either. So we think that can be improved. We're thinking about 6 work streams for the National Health Information Platform. Delivery of data, starting with medicines and other trusted sources. creation of a consumer service and a provider service that's accessible to everyone using those digital identities, and then some of those technology enablers that needs to be in place to make that happen. And then lastly, but really importantly, change and adoption. So there's no point creating access to this data in Molesworth Street in the ministry if you're not incentivising and funding and working with the sector and with industry to make sure they're able to be offered through the services that you all use today. So there's a major focus around change and adoption. And our target is budget 21, so July next year for budget implementation. It was budget 20, and then a small thing called COVID got in the way. But we're now targeting budget 21 for that major investment. We're engaging pretty widely, so I've certainly been presenting on this multiple times currently. Our structure going forward, we really want to engage through existing groups because those groups have the networks, the relationships and the understanding of what makes a difference. And we have a pretty standard governance structure which reports all the way up through to the Minister of Health. And a last mention on digital enablement. So if that's National Health Information Platform, which is about data accessibility, we're also really focused on what we're framing as digital enablement. And that really covers three things. So telehealth, how do you use information and communication technology to get healthcare to people when they're physically in a different place. Teleworking, the ability for people to work from any location and get their job done, whether they're health providers or administrators or individuals. And then digital inclusion. So how do we target equity? How do we target the people that actually can't get access to these services? Because if we're not careful, we create inequities by delivering digital capability. And we're focused on a few areas where we've picked these out of a process and said we think we should have a look at these as possible national capabilities. Not necessarily one system nationally, but understanding how we can solve this. So scheduling, as an example, we know is a major issue. You can deliver telehealth consults, but being able to schedule them and manage them alongside your in-person consults is not particularly easy, and it's a real barrier. So how do we do that? We think we need to have a conversation nationally about that. And I think that's us.
Thank you very much. Coming from one of the DHBs that scored very highly on your list, Ruth, Whakamawa, I'm convinced that you need a local champion to drive these changes, and we've been very lucky to have Dr. Lara Hopley at our DHB, who's an anaesthetist, but now spends half her time with IT and championing across all groups. And it's been brilliant. But I'm convinced you probably do need a local champion at each site, because she's the one that takes phone calls, emails, any time of the day or night, and will fix things immediately and make things work. And we are virtually paperless now, almost completely. So we're going to go through some questions now, which Charlie will read out.
Just a reminder to have a quick look at Slido and vote for the ones that you would like me to pose. Top of the list is a question from Suzanne. Having one IT system in the South Island has been very useful to have oversight of the patient journey. Why the reticence to mandate a national system for a population of 5 million?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I guess it comes back to experience. So the first comment would be that in the South Island you don't have one system. You have thousands. What you do have is you do have a really solid, trusted source of information that's accessible by all DHBs into general practice and into some of your major NGOs. So Health One is the system I'm talking about. But the system used at the clinical coalface varies from organisation to organisation. The key is that it can integrate in and make data accessible across all of those settings. One system could work, but what we've seen in the US and that article by Atul Gawande is a really good case in point, where one system means standardised processes across every organisation and sort of assumes that every organisation is homogenous, and that there's the ability to have authority to make decisions in one place for all. And we know in our public health system, which is federated, I mean, DHBs are autonomous. So that we really struggle even at regional level to make that happen, let alone national. We've seen national maternity system, we've seen the national Oracle system. they really struggle, not because the technology is not that good, but because, back to the point earlier, you have to start by understanding the problem you're looking to solve. And the problem for a clinician in Gisborne may not be the same as the problem for a clinician in Waikato. So if you're not having those conversations around what are the problems you need to solve for those people in that setting, you run the risk of oversimplifying and having a system that actually works but doesn't work particularly well for anyone because you've got so many compromises.
Thank you. Question from Jeff. A decade ago, exactly the same goals were espoused at NHB and ministry level. We appear to have made tiny progress at best. What confidence can we have entering into 2021?
All questions to me at the moment. Yep. Look, I think the reason the goals are the same, it's really back to that digital health strategic framework, is that we all know that we want information to be accessible, and we all want tools that help us to do our jobs. And we know the technology can do it. That's the irony, but also, I guess, why those that work in health IT, because you know the tech can do this, or why can't we deliver it? So I think that's the first thing. The goals are the same because the goals are absolutely right. They weren't wrong then, they're not wrong now. The question of what will be different this time is, I think, there's a couple of answers to that. One, we have seen progress, although it may not seem like it. So 10 years ago, for example, Health One didn't exist. We didn't have a Midland clinical portal in the Midland region. We didn't have cloud-based practice management systems. We didn't have a whole range of telehealth options that are available now. I mean, Zoom didn't exist, for example, as a consumer-grade platform. So we have made progress in terms of making data accessible and using different tools. But the other thing that's occurred is that technology's moved on. As I say, 5 years ago, if COVID had hit, we would have been in real trouble. We would not have been able to respond with a national contact tracing platform. We would not have been able to deliver a consumer app in the time that we did 5 years ago. So I think those are the two things for me that are different. And then probably the last thing to say is that we won't get it 100% right, but if you deliver in small iterations, you have the ability to learn and to pivot. If you've got a one monolithic big delivery program and you are going down the wrong path, it's really hard to reverse out of it. So that agility is really key.
Thank you. I'm just going to pose this next question to Ruth to give you a break. There's a couple of questions talking about the broader issue of inequities. Alice notes that sometimes telehealth can exacerbate inequities, for example, in mental health. Many of the patients are homeless. And another person noted that Julian Vyas' most recent data suggests that 11% of New Zealand population do not have access to internet. And so both questions are really asking, how can we stop further disenfranchisement?
No, absolutely agree. That number's probably more like 20% in terms of inaccessibility, and that tends to sway more towards folk over the age of 55 and socioeconomic groups. So there is something called the digital divide. You can go, if you Google it, you'll see it on some really nice maps laid out for you. There is no doubt, like I said before, that you can build telehealth systems which are quick and easy to use for people who don't need them or people who want them. Building something initially with an equity focus in a co-design manner is key here. And I think if, for us in Waikato, that means that we're designing something locally and involved a number of different groups. So that's the first thing that I would say, and I agree that, as Darren says, that sometimes these things just have to be local, and then we need to learn from those experiences. So that's the first thing that helps address with that equity question. The other things, more practical things like access to data, access to devices. Certainly, again, in our DHB, we're looking at how we can actually do a digital prescription, and there's been a number of financial investments that the ministry have made, which have been targeted at that equity question and that innovation. So there's money out there for this sort of thing, and I mean, how many, there's a significant amount of zero-rated data now as well, isn't there, Darren?
There's about 15 sites now. I think the other thing to mention is obviously there's an all government play here. So we're having discussions with Department of Internal Affairs around a universal basic internet concept, which is that today, in terms of a digital public service, if you have people that actually can't access these services online, then you have a major issue for your citizens. So we're talking about the idea of, can you at a government level ensure that everyone has access?
But I mean, I would go back to that, if you're going to build something, the best thing to do is to aim at those people who can't actually get access already, because if you just build it for your average Joe Blow, it'll be really difficult to go back and get that equity lens on. So it has to be equity first, in my opinion.
And just to segue from that point, a couple of questions here picking up on actually the access for clinicians. Alice notes that during lockdown, everybody in her team had to use their own personal devices because the DHB issued devices were incompatible. So a question there as to whether the Ministry of Health would actually look to fund the right hardware. And another sort of related question, noting that when they work in a national service, they have electronic access to the EMR of 5 DHBs, but usually only when they're on site. So how can that allow virtual clinical activity to be done efficiently or safely?
So this is one of the challenges of our health system, right? So in terms of who delivers technology within individual health organisations, whether they're DHBs or GP practices or NGOs, the technology are delivered by those organisations. So I can talk from a Ministry of Health point of view. When we went to level 4, the Ministry of Health almost overnight issued people with devices, monitors, keyboards, chairs to be able to work from home. I can tell you that was happening at an all-government level, and there was major pressure on supply chain around that. So is the ministry likely to fund DHBs around around laptops and devices? I mean, the honest answer to that would be no. Do we recognise that there are challenges around the technology that is in use today within district health boards and other health provider organisations? Absolutely yes. So the National Asset Management Program and the Health and Disability System Review both have called out significant underinvestment around technology within health organisations, and that's absolutely a problem that has to be addressed. Question of how, almost back to the question to the Minister of, are you going to give DHBs more money? The question of how is still to be resolved. But if I think about that digital future and I think about sustainability, if information's accessible but clinicians can only get it when they're sat at their desk in a hospital because it doesn't work across the internet from home, it doesn't work. You've got to tackle that for clinicians as well as you do for consumers.
Any comment from you, Ruth, or no? No? Okay, all good. So Siobhan also notes, and this is a similar issue, that the average private organisation spends about 7% of operating budget on IT, but the average DHB spends less than 4%. So obviously that's an issue.
Yeah, I think it's actually wrong. I think the average DHB spends about 1.6%. It's significantly worse than that, and this is a major challenge. And this is, when you're an organisation that has multiple pressures on your funding, in terms of delivering clinically safe care, in terms of your building real estate and some of the issues there, in terms of changing models of care around consumer expectations, burden of chronic disease, workforce challenges. I'll constantly advocate for more money into technology, but I'm probably a little way down the queue, to be honest. But it is again, it's a major issue. Yeah, we do not invest where globally and in terms of other industries we should be investing.
And I mean, I think the corollary of that is that actually it's the responsibility of everybody in this room to be advocating for the digital tools that we need to do our jobs. You know, I think that's really, really important. So, you know, and likewise, when we're looking at new kit, you know, thinking about the consequences of that. You know, radiological devices are a really good example, but there's lots of other ones. You know, even buying things like 3D printers, how's that going to integrate? There's so much tech now. We go to conferences and we see all these wonderful, fantastic things. Certainly in my place, I see different services getting different bits, and then all of a sudden there's this, you know, need to plug it in somewhere because we haven't thought of that, because we've been sold something that just, you know, kind of should work, but won't with the other bits to go with. So, you know, I think having a really, you know, if you're going back into your DHBs, have a think about where clinical informatics sits as positioned in your structure. Are there ways you can feed back? Is there a local clinical informatic reference group? I think the point that, you know, has been made from the Whakamawa, one of the reasons they've done so well is because they've allocated resource and clinical time into those roles, not just from an SMO point of view, but from an RMO, nursing, allied health perspective. So I think we all should take that challenge back. It's not necessarily a ministry thing to solve, I don't think.
I just add one comment to that. So in terms of that COVID response, I mean, the really interesting thing with that is that we delivered solutions because we could leverage cloud and we could leverage the technology that was there. We delivered solutions for probably less than it would have cost us to have done the business case in normal times. And there's a real learning in that. So one of the other things I'd encourage, and we're certainly doing it from inside the ministry, is that actually when you can leverage these tools and iterate quickly, you can demonstrate what you can deliver and also demonstrate where the gaps are far more effectively than if you write a 200-page business case and try to get it through the multiple sign-off stages. So I'd encourage you to be looking at that as well within your organisations.
And it's another very relevant way that we can try and reduce our ever-increasing CME balances quite legitimately with these various tools of the trade. If you feel you have to have it, use your money.
I'm going to summarise a few questions because we're running out of time, but there's quite a few talking about the need for better integration, particularly between dental records, also primary care and secondary care medical records, barriers to sharing patient data in a safe format. Have you got any comments on those issues?
I agree. I mean, this is at the core of what that National Health Information Platform is about. We have data, but it's locked up. It's in silos, and there's technology and also non-technology barriers around the ability to access that data and bring it together. So we absolutely agree. The question is where you start. We do think that primary care is a place where we really need to focus, and then there's key information like medicines, like diagnostics, that we think we really need to focus on, like immunisations. Yeah.
Thank you. And I will finish with John's question. It's good to see that Southern DHB doing well, developing digital health. We had a very strong CIO a few years ago, but he also stole $30 million. How do we avoid the massive frauds that seem to plague the health IT sector?
I'm old enough to remember Mike Swan. So, yeah, look, I mean, the simple answer to that is that that's why we have processes. That's why we have diligence. And the key thing in terms of moving quickly is that you can leverage these tools, and you can now invest in really cost-effective tools and deliver gains, without siphoning money for a boat in the harbour. Yeah.
I'd like to draw this session to a close now, and just like to thank Ruth and Darren very sincerely for coming up here and telling us so much about where we are going to be going soon. Thank you very much. We have morning tea now, and please be back here by 11 o'clock to hear Charlie talk about feedback from the members' survey.
Thank you.
got to get a coffee.